Buenas tardes.
All done? Can you hear me?
Yes, fine.
Beautiful. Let me just see. I'm trying to share my screen. John, what do you see?
I see a big white thing saying you are sharing screen.
Right.
Yeah.
Why that? And when I do that, do you see the
text?
Now you see the flow sheet? Great.
Yes.
Okay. And now I need to get you. There we go. And now let me see. Oh, why? Hold on. Let me bring everybody in. Is everybody in?
Yes, I see you.
Hi, Kathleen.
Hi.
I don't know why it's not letting me see you all guys at the same time. That's what I would like to do. Oh, there we are. Yay. Okay, we're figuring it out. Slowly, slowly. And now this. And now this. Do you guys see the text again, or you don't?
Not now, no.
Not now.
No. Right? I'm not sure why I can't access the text and see you guys at the same time. Let me get technical help here. Give me a quick second. I'm going to stop the video and mute myself to see if I can work behind the scenes.
No problem. No problem.
John,
Tell me, yes.
where are you coming from?
I'm in Spain, in Andalusia, southern Spain.
Oh my, how fancy.
Yeah.
Is that where you live?
I do. I've been here about 5 years. I didn't realize actually that I think Sabrina originally comes from Madrid,
Oh my goodness.
or at least has spent a lot of time there. I wasn't quite sure, and I still haven't found out exactly the connection. I'm guessing you're in the States, but I can't tell which part.
That's right. I'm in Florida, Sarasota, Florida, but I'm from New England, so
Okay.
it's hard to tell at this point.
Florida probably still quite nice this time of year, but New England getting cold.
Gorgeous. I went swimming this morning. It was gorgeous.
Oh.
And how about Spain?
Well, it's turning cold, but the days we usually have sunshine, so I don't grumble when I think of what's going on in England, which is my home country.
Yes, that's where I thought you were going to say you were from. I fell for your accent.
I haven't seen this actual type of screen. I would be confused if I were looking at all this data on the screen at the moment.
Yeah.
It looks like a slightly different Zoom, but there you go.
Well, there she goes.
Looks more like we used to have it.
Yeah.
Hello, Elaine.
Hi, John, Linda.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, I also joined when the screen looked. She had her screen sharing on for some reason. That's why.
Okay.
We change the view here. Full screen.
Oh, we're back to screen
There
sharing.
it is.
Ah, that looks good. That looks like
She
us
got it
and the
perfect.
text.
I think she did it.
Okay.
I got all that done with one scratch out.
Technical issues, but I think
We're
you
supposed to
can,
have all fit on one card.
and you see the text, right? Are we good? Yes, yay, I'm so excited. Okay. All right, so I can't see myself, so I don't know if the camera is well positioned with me, but we're gonna have to work with what we have today.
We
So-
can see you.
Good, awesome. So if you don't hear me or if I look funny on the other side or something, just let me know, but here we are. What time is it? 8:04. Okay. Today, before we even get into today, let's just like recap for a second a little bit about our reactions to last session. to the Chacham and the Tam, and
Here.
saw I just saw some some emails that I had not seen right before I started, some reflections on it. But if anybody feels like wants to say anything about last week learning, I would be very happy to hear if anything has trickled down from last week till today.
I don't mind kicking off. I'm the new boy, I think. I've got one slightly more serious observation and one slightly more flippant one. So the serious one was just that I've come late to the course, and I'm very much appreciating jumping in. And I did know the story, but I hadn't listened to it for many, many, many years. And so I listened to it again, and I remember being quite frightened by the end with the devil, and it really was quite medieval in some ways.
Yes.
And it's also made me think, as I think others were saying last week, really about my own life and my own urges towards sophistication and simplification, and how I try and balance them. And well, it's ongoing. It's an ongoing project. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
The slightly more light-hearted comment was that there's a couple of references to Spain in the story. I just wanted to draw that out slightly because it may be outside, I think, of where you're probably wanting to go. But he mentions as an artisan that his lapels or his cut diamond would have been appreciated in Spain. And I just wondered whether there was I'd just be curious to know in Nachman's time how Spain and Jewish Spain was regarded, whether it was a kind of an exotic land of art and craft. And I don't know, but that may be something another time where you.
Yeah, it definitely gives the sense that Spain is the other side of the world, right? As far away as can be from wherever they are in Eastern Europe. I have no sense of what was the conception of Spain, of present-day Spain in the days of Rabbi Nachman. Obviously, there is Spain and all the commentators from Spain, so there's a sense of like medieval Spain very much present in the Jewish life and learning, for sure, and an awareness of the contribution of Spanish Jewry during the golden age of Spain. But literally in the 1800s, I mean, I don't know, no sense. But what I would say though, John, that is an interesting comment with regards to Rabbi Nachman in the context of time and history. Rabbi Nachman, we haven't talked about that, and like I think we might get to that or not in a more focused way, but the relationship between Rabbi Nachman's teachings and the current events that took place during his lifetime. So it's a very interesting thing to know that Rabbi Nachman often would ask his Hasidim, tell me the news. I want to know the news. And based on the news, and we're talking about the time of the Napoleonic Wars, we're talking about a time of great upheaval in Europe, right? Like big revolutions and big tensions taking place at that time. Kind of like, I don't know, maybe not this, I mean, I'm not an historian, but I can imagine that this is a time also where we're like redefining so many things, right? So I think the 1800s were also a time like that. And Rabbi Nachman would ask, give me the news. And based on the news, then he would say, oh, so I have a Torah or I have a teaching to tell you. And sometimes it would be more or less explicitly connected to the news. But there's like very famous saying of Rabbi Nachman that he would say, I cannot live without the news. I cannot live without a sense of being involved in present day global or historical or European history. So when you ask about what would be the
Rambam
said,
when he was sick, pray for me, pray that I should recover, and I will take you by a new way, a way that has never before existed. It is indeed an ancient way, and yet it's completely new.
Yeah. Who's talking? Is that you, Brenda?
Yeah.
Okay, just didn't know. Yeah, so you started reading the first the first
Yeah, to my fiance, sorry.
Is there a reason why you brought it up?
No, we were sitting here talking about the class, and I didn't know I was off mute. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Yeah, we'll get to that. It's okay. Yeah. Let's just stay for a second more, a little bit more in like any kind of like comments from last week, so we can kind of like slowly integrate the layers of, you know, the teachings that we're doing, or the layers of understanding Rabbi Nachman. Any other comments from the story? And obviously, you know, we didn't get to read the whole story. It would be too long for one session, right? I just took a very small portion to kind of emphasize, you know, it's
How
interesting.
can I speak?
Say that again?
Can I speak?
Of course.
Because I don't see myself. I sent you an email about my intake about the story, and I'm sorry I'm late. And for me, looking, as I said and I hadn't read anything on Rabbi Nachman or on interpretation of his text. I was just reading the story again and again and discussing it with my husband. And for me, the educated or the sophisticated person was quite problematic, because if he did not even, as I said, recognize the existence of the real king,
The king,
you know,
right.
the king of this earth, how would he or how could he recognize the existence of Hashem?
Yeah,
Mm.
definitely. You
So
know, that's
that's what came out of this text for me.
yes, for sure. Like that's a very important part of the story that we didn't have really time to develop or to read about last week. The you know, Rabbi Nachman is very clearly having that show us in a very kind of like dichotomous type of way, the way of the Tam and the way of the Tam, very separately from each other, even though they, you know, they interact in the story. But like, you know, John was talking about like the you know, the how do we move from Chacham to Tam in our lives, right? Rabbi Nachman presents them as very separate. And I think that in a certain way, in our own experiences, we talked a little bit of how we can somehow identify ourselves with the Chacham in our pursuit of, you know, education, sophistication, wanting to expand our possibilities, engaging our children to do the same, and seeking, you know, options and opportunities. Rabbi Nachman is very clearly showing us the downside of that extreme direction. But I think that thinking of ourselves as educated, you know, for the most part, more or less people, we cannot avoid but recognize that we have in ourselves a side that is very much related to the sophisticate. And how do we negotiate tmimut and simplicity in our lives, while at the same time, you know, we recognize, you know, our time in the world and where we come from. So that's a, you know, the ability to kind of like contain both, or to give voice to both, or to one in the context of balance, I think is a very important question as we think about the story. And in my own life, you know, I still like, you know, sophisticated things. I like nice wine, and I like to travel, and I like to go to new places, and I like to be exposed to, you know, anything that the world has to offer. And yet I yearn for a sense of simplicity, for a sense of being able to, you know, to look at my shoe, as we said last week, and recognize the simple value of the production of my hands, not just my hands in a literal sense, but also of the things that I do and engage with in my life. And that's complicated, I think, when we think about modernity and what we expect of ourselves. Mm-hmm. Any other comment that, you know, you would like to share before we jump in? Is that John? Who
You
did
know,
anybody?
back to, I said I didn't read. Now, yesterday I went, do you hear me? Yes.
I do.
Yeah. I went my husband brought me the stories of Rabbi Nachman and the commentary of Rabbi Stansos.
Yes.
And at the end, he said, the educated one, with his questioning and looking into everything, could lead to, how do you say, atheism,
Both.
atheism,
Yeah. Yeah.
rejecting completely God.
Yes. Yes.
And that, that came out, as I was pursuing, that story with other interpretation. And, but as I always say to my husband, we go into the country, we're in nature. And then I said, I'm at peace. That's where I'm the most at peace, and finding all the wonder of life when we go to nature.
Yeah.
So that's something, which is very close to what the Tam is
I agree.
is telling us.
I agree in a certain
even
way. Yeah, yeah. But well, I hope we get to, have a session on nature and Rabbi Nachman's relationship with nature, although he's actually going to talk about that today in one of the texts that I brought you with relation to Hitbodedut, this like practice of personal prayer that Rabbi Nachman is going to describe in one of the texts that I brought today. But before we get into the text, I want to kind of because today
I'm reading that book that you recommended, Tormented Minds.
Tormented Master?
Yeah, Tormented Master, yeah.
Yes. What about that?
That's a really good book.
It is. Yes. 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 So let's jump in. Can we all jump into today's session? We're all ready. I'd like to do a little bit of a it's going to be less today. I would like it that we engage less with our heads and more with our hearts. I think that's my goal, that we kind of like bring down the head to the heart. And I'd like to do that by starting to just kind of have a very, short, I'll put a timer, like a 3-minute guided meditation or guided visualization to kind of like kickstart this session on prayer, right? Because we're not going to talk about prayer, but we're going to try to bring in prayer into our lives as I have been trying to establish, and I feel like I should have actually done this in the very beginning. So I'm learning how to do this better. But in any case, let's sink in, right? Like close your eyes or don't, or close your video, and if you would prefer. I'm going to put a timer for about 3 minutes, and I'm just going to guide you in a little very short very simple visualization. What I would like to do is for you guys to feel, as comfortable as you can in your seats, finding, again, the breath, bringing in consciousness to our breath, bringing our consciousness to, to our bodies, whatever side, whatever part of our bodies is mostly needing attention at the moment. And just follow the breath for a couple of breath cycles, gently, not forcing, just allowing the breath to become more at the center of our experience. And as we follow the ins and outs of our breath and the sensations in our bodies, I would like to invite you to take a little journey with me into your day. And kind of like go back to the beginning of the day, to the moment that you woke up this morning. And starting with your day, see if you can go back to your morning, the activities that you went through this morning. And what I'm going to ask you to do, if we can, is as we scan our day, and I will guide you through the day, let's see if we can find moments in the day that seem full with content, like important moments today. A moment that we would like to think about a little more, maybe change, maybe shift, maybe an interaction, maybe a thought, maybe a state of mind. So starting from this morning, let's just go through our day and see if we can identify a moment in our day that catches our attention as a moment of potential growth or a moment of needing to reevaluate. So see yourselves in the morning, going back to the morning. What did you do this morning? Did you go to work? Did you have any encounters? It's going to be, middle of the day. What happened in the middle of the day for you guys? Did you leave the house? Did you go to work? Did you come back from work? Did you work from home? Let's move towards the early afternoon. I just realized also that we're in very different time zones. So you guys might be in the beginning of your days because I'm at the end of my day. So whatever amount of time that you've had today, let's see if we can really find a moment to pause in. A moment that needs attention. A moment that maybe you don't feel so satisfied with today. So I hope that you have been able to focus and zoom in into that moment so far in your day today. And let's take another deep breath and come back to our group. And when you're ready, open your eyes. So, as I said before, today I would like us to sink in, try to bring in a certain sense of presence into the learning so that we can really move from the head into our hearts to develop to have more kelim, more abilities, to develop this skill called Hitbodedut. So I brought a series of very beautiful texts that are very evocative, and they're not so difficult to learn. The first one is a very striking text where Rabbi Nachman, as you can read it for yourselves also, is very, very simple. Like he's sick with tuberculosis and he's asking his Hasidim to pray for him, right? In a very humble and in a very vulnerable place. And with that, you know, the invitation from him that if they succeed, or if he succeeds in overcoming this tuberculosis, he's ready to take his Hasidim in the, you know, in a path that has never existed before. And he talks about this like ancient path that is completely new, right? And Rabbi Nachman, in my experience of learning Rabbi Nachman, there's always a sense of like, he's often taking you to two places at the same time. He's a master of inhabiting paradox. He's a master of inhabiting contradictions. And we can see it again and again in many of his teachings, where I have described before that I feel like I'm learning something and I go, oh yeah, I get it. And then the next statement, he says something completely on the other direction. It's like, wait a minute, I thought I was already standing in one side, and then suddenly he takes me to the next side. And I often find myself having to refine my balance. And in this case, in this very short, you know, phrase of Rabbi Nachman, he's already, you know, bringing his Hasidim to this experience of encountering something that is very ancient, but at the same time is something completely new. How could something be ancient and completely new at the same time, right? And I think that it's a good opening for Hitbodedut, because Hitbodedut is very ancient. Rabbi Nachman, in many other places where he zooms into the concept of tefillah, prayer, and Hitbodedut in particular, he says that Hitbodedut is not his idea. It's not something that he came up with, but it's something that has been used by the long line of tzaddikim, and he starts with Adam Arishon, onward. He goes through the genealogy until his day, and the Baal Shem Tov before him, his great-grandfather, to explain that any kind of spiritual development that happened throughout history came by the practice of Hitbodedut. So what is Hitbodedut, right? And how is this Hitbodedut within the category of something that is ancient, that was practiced, you know, traditionally by all the luminaries of our tradition, and at the same time is something completely new? How do we understand that? So in order to really, you know, keep that in mind and see if we can understand that a little bit better by the end of the session, I'm just going to open another. Why? No, I want to open this. Hold on a sec. It's going to the Hebrew. Okay, so I'm just going to not do that. I want to go directly to the English just because of time, and I want to really not spend time in the translation. But I don't have the Hebrew, the English here. Why? I'm really sorry with all the technical difficulties today. Why can't I access? Oh, because I gave you the link to this version. That's too bad. Okay, I am going to get out of the screen share and I'm going to read this for you. Do you guys have the link that I sent you on your own? I'm going to ask you that we work through that, because I really want to have access to the English. I don't want to spend the time with the translation. So I'm going to close. I'm going to stop the share. Switch to gallery view and go to my own Safari here. Okay. And I'm going to go to the second text, which is the text in Likutei Moharan, where Rabbi Nachman is going to be developing the concept of Hitbodedut. Do you have it? Yeah, good.
I'm sorry, where is this in the email that you sent? Is it the link from the email that you sent?
Yeah, it's in the link of the source sheet for session number 3 in Hitbodedut.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
I can get that. Yeah,
okay.
I got it now. Mhm.
Okay. All right, so let's go for it. So I'll just read it in English, and we'll be pausing. I underlined the areas that I felt were mostly more important for me to develop, but of course everybody would have a different entry point into this text. So again, we're looking into Likutei Moharan, which is the main text of Rabbi Nachman. And it's a very straightforward description of what he means by Hitbodedut. Hitbodedut in Hebrew, for some of you, I feel like I don't know, how much Hebrew you speak, but Hitboded is a very beautiful construction because badad is to be alone. Badad is alone by yourself. The Hitbodedut, is the practice of being alone, but in the reflexive, right? So it's like similar to tefillah, lehitpalel. Lehitpalel is to daven, to pray, in the reflexive, right? There's a reflexivity, like an intrinsic connotation of being really, in relationship with yourself as you are being alone. Right, so you are alone, but you are with yourself. And that is a little bit of what I'm trying to get to today, an experience or allowing ourselves to create time for this Hitbodedut, which is being alone, but very present in your own experience and very present with yourself. So Rabbi Nachman describes Hitbodedut is the highest asset and greater than everything. That is, to set aside for oneself at least 1 hour or more for secluding ourselves in some room or field. And talking about nature, Rabbi Nachman often would go out into nature. And in the Ukraine, there's tons of beautiful woods to go to. It's not like living in the city. But he was known by spending a lot of time in nature and using claims and excuses. Speak one's peace with one's maker, using words that evoke favor, placate, and conciliate in order to entreat and plead with God that he bring one closer to him, to genuine divine worship. So there's a lot in this text that he's kind of like jumping at us. But I think that if we continue reading forward down, we will unpack a little bit of what he means by setting aside. Okay, at least let's start with, well, maybe not. We'll talk about the timing later. But at least the elements that we see here is like a certain amount of time by yourself in some room or outside where you have that ability to be by yourself. And then he's going to talk about how do we talk and what kind of methodology do we use to speak to God in. And then he's going to, unpack this a little bit more as we go. So let's continue. This prayer, he calls it a prayer in conversation, right? We're talking about a conversation with God, should be, in your native language, because it is difficult for a person to say everything he wants to say in the Holy Tongue. Also, being unfamiliar with that language, one's heart is not moved by the words, as we are not accustomed to speaking Hebrew. But in our native tongue, in which we normally speak and converse, it is much easier and more likely for one to feel contrition. This is because the heart is drawn to a person's native tongue and closer to it on account of his familiarity with it, and in one's native tongue, one can express oneself fully. So let's pause here for a second and kind of like unpack this. So in this section, he's talking about what language to use, and he's saying, well, it's better not to use Hebrew because we're not so accustomed. We don't have that emotional connection to Hebrew that we would have to our tongue. And why is that? Because somehow in this process of Hitbodedut, we want to be able to enlist the heart, right? Are you familiar with the, traditional understanding of how tefillah and heart are related? Have you ever seen that connection before? A little bit, Elaine, not Kathleen, Linda, John. Yeah, no. So in traditional sources, in the Gemara, once the temple was the main vehicle for worship before the two temples were destroyed was through sacrifices, right? People would come into Yerushalayim, bringing their sheep or bringing their flour, bringing their oil, and then the Kohen would offer they would have the offerings in the temple. And that was the way in which we traditionally, during the temple time, we experienced in a very visceral way, through animals and through blood and whatever. Like there's so much to say about traditional, the korbanot, the sacrifices, but that was the emotion. The sacrifices contain the emotional, what is the word that I'm trying to, the emotional catharsis, right? In order to connect to something that was bigger than you. Once the temples were destroyed and we didn't have the ability to bring in sacrifices anymore, the sages established that from now on, what is the worship or the service of the temple that used to be sacrifices would now be the service of the heart, avodah shebalev, right? So we moved from this kind of external enactment, right, of something that is being offered to God, and whatever connotations we can have with that, it's for another session, right, or another context. And we move from there to the ability to develop the heart as a vehicle to feel the presence of God and to feel ourselves in the presence of God. And the rabbis established that as the main vehicle for developing a practice of prayer. So prayer and the heart already from 2000 years ago has a very intrinsic connection. Rabbi Nachman now is saying another layer of connection between tefillah and prayer, which is connected to the language that we speak and the quality of the language that we speak. What happens when we engage in a language that is very dear to us or that is very near to us, that instead of using Hebrew as a way of evoking a state of consciousness or a sense of connection with the past or our tradition or our history, now we're going to be relating to the heart, in our own tongue, to evoke an aliveness, to evoke something that is very mine. Somebody described it, Hitbodedut has to be in the mama lashon, right? In the most primitive, in the most basic. We try to go down to the most basic level of experience. And that's why today I wanted to start with identifying a moment in your day that contains information for you guys, right? Is there such a thing in today's day that we can say, there was something about this moment that I want to pay attention? So Rabbi Nachman is saying, we start with our own language. We cannot do it in Hebrew because we don't have access, that emotional connection to Hebrew, and we want to establish the emotional connection from the get-go. Let's move on. And now he goes into the content, right? First he says, okay, this is the language, this is the petri dish, right? This is the environment that we need to enter. It needs to be something that is familiar. It needs to be something that is secluded. And I need to be alone, but with myself. I need to bring myself into it. And everything that is in the heart, he should express and tell to God. Everything that is in the heart. That's such an important sentence. What is in my heart? Right? Like what's in my heart? Can I identify what is in my heart? Can I have enough attention? Can I have enough presence? Can I have enough quiet to kind of hear my heart speak? Everything that is in the heart, he should express to God. Be it remorse and repentance for the past, be it something that we're not so happy about, something that we would like to change, something that needs attention, or please to genuinely merit drawing closer to God from this day forward, or like a desire, to come closer to God. We can expand that concept to come closer to others, to come closer to ourselves, to feel more aligned in my life. Right? Anything in a certain way, I really believe that any way that we come closer to ourselves, be'emet, truly we come closer to God as well, or the like. Each individual according to his level, right? So each individual according to where he's at in his life, her life, to what's going on in this particular day, to what is where am I starting my day from? One should be very careful to make this a daily practice. So Rebbi Nachman is telling us that this is not something to do once in a while, or when we feel compelled to pray, or when we have a desire, where we're like in a very hard place, or we're in a place of inspiration, or Hitbodedut is not for those peak moments, but Hitbodedut is a practice that is a daily practice. Some of us struggle with more than others with daily practices, with establishing the rhythm of something that feels like, oh my God, again, right? And again and again and again. But we all know that as hard as daily practices are, they're also extremely rewarding in the sense of creating, right? Like a very strong foundation for things to grow. So he talks about a daily practice at a scheduled time. I try to do it daily at the same time every day, right? Is it the morning? Is it in the afternoon? Is it the evening? Is it exactly at 8 o'clock? Or for me, it's not even exactly at a particular time, but it's when I wake up in the morning. It's, I try not to do anything before I give myself that time. So we should do it daily at a scheduled time. And then he says, but the rest of the day should be happy, as mentioned above. And again, I took it, we're not looking at this Torah in the context, but like I just kind of zoomed in to be able to focus on Hitbodedut. The benefit of this practice is extraordinarily great. It is an extremely good path and guideline for drawing close to God, because it is a universal guideline that encompasses everything. Rebbi Nachman talks often about universal guidelines, etzot klaliot, things that we should do to kind of like, that we should incorporate in order, I think, to grow, in order to become the next and the next and the next version of who we are. And we saw, Resh Pebet in our first session as one of those, general guidelines of looking for Nekudot Tovot. If you remember, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about this concept of being able to recognize the good points in me and being able to recognize the good points in others. And that's also like a fundamental guideline. And this is another one, right? Hitbodedut, the ability to meet yourself together with God on a daily basis, every day, or, at a particular time. Now, I wanted to kind of like talk about the hour, right? I think that definitely breast lovers and take this seriously and do take the 60 minutes every day as a guideline of like, okay, it has to be 60 minutes. And there's something to be said for spending time immersed in this practice, right? There's something quantitatively different or qualitatively different between doing it for 5 minutes than doing it for 45 minutes or doing it for an hour, whatever it is, right? You can imagine that it takes time to kind of settle in. It takes time to sink in. It takes time to hear your heart. It takes time to like understand what you want to say. What do you want to talk about? It's like a little bit in therapy. Sometimes we jump right in, but a lot of times we kind of like, okay, where's the topic of the day? Where do I find myself? In a certain way, an hour allows you for that. However, it's very important to to say that if we're not able to sustain an hour, or an hour feels extremely daunting, which has felt for me, and it still feels for me, that I cannot do an hour. Like it feels like, oh my God, I don't have the time, or I don't have the wherewithal, or I don't have the attention, or like, you know, I get the snegagis and I want to move on with my day. It's okay to start with 5 minutes, right? That's the od me'at that we saw in the first session, right? It's always good to start small. So 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, it doesn't matter, as long as we take it on as a practice that we can rely on every single day. And he's going to a little bit talk about that in the next paragraph, which is a beautiful paragraph. Even if occasionally a person's words are sealed, right? Like he's being real, right? Sometimes we don't know what to say. Sometimes we don't really know what our heart is wanting to deliver. We just are confused, or we can't focus, and he cannot open his mouth to say anything at all to God. He can't open his mouth. She doesn't know what to say. This itself is nonetheless very good. There's value even in that. Even in sitting down in silence, there's still value. Why? Because there's a readiness in his presence before God. He showed up, right? It's like, I'm sure you've heard this before. What is a good meditation? A meditation that you do, that you sit on, right? It doesn't matter how it is. Did you focus? Didn't you focus? Did you have a lot of thoughts? Did you have it doesn't matter. You sat. That's a good meditation, right? Similarly with Hitbodedut, it doesn't matter how much you talk, how little you talk. It doesn't matter, because what we're measuring here is the effort to sit, the effort to show up to yourself and to show up to Hashem.
I have a question.
Please.
I saw something about some of the followers of Rebbi Nachman in Israel. And
Yes.
it seemed like they had the whole day, they were together, and they had the whole day, they would go around and dance in the street. And then they just said, okay, now we're going to the forest for our hour. And I don't know if they worked or not, but I had the feeling that maybe this was designed to be done in a community, because it is kind of something you would maybe need somebody to kind of cheer you on a little bit.
Well, I think community always helps, right? When you live in a community that shares your values, or shares the wanting to grow in this particular direction, it's always good to have other people that share that interest, and that kind of like you can have accountability, chevrutas, and checking with your friend. I did it, I didn't do it, how much I did it. That is very true. However, I don't think any of the teachings of Rebbi Nachman apply ever to a particular set of conditions or circumstances. Absolutely not. They're by definition, and you can see that all the time, always universal, and always for any moment, any context, any situation, they're always for you and for me, whether I live with community or don't, whether I struggle with it, but or don't, whether I have a strong spiritual life or don't. It doesn't matter. The teachings of Rebbi Nachman are always designed to say, no matter where you are, no matter what you are about, it's also for you. So you don't need the community, but the community helps. Yeah. Does that answer?
Yeah, I just think that doing things on your own, like following these solitary spiritual paths, are kind of daunting. It might be too much to actually join this cult-like group that's going around in white dancing in the street. I don't know, but there must be some middle ground somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, that's like a whole other question of like all the sociological phenomenon of like Breslov in Israel, right? Like it's definitely a very strong movement in Israel today. And there's very many different expressions of Breslov. And that's one of the things that I really love about Rebbi Nachman's teaching, is that you can find Breslovers that look like this, that practice like this, that look like that, and practice like that. And, like there's a lot of variety. And you can be very much like a business person and be a Breslover, and you can live in Mea Shearim and spend your days in contemplation and be a Breslover, and everything in between, right? You can be a wrestler anywhere you are and no matter where you are, right? But I think this idea that if I understood correctly, Kathleen, like the daunting of being alone is daunting. It's a lot easier to, for some of us to be in groups or to do things together with other people. And that's why we like to daven and to pray in a community, in a minyan, right? And that's very powerful and important. And Rabbi Nachman is not saying do that instead of the other. He's saying those are two different modes of prayer. There's the traditional prayer where you go to shul and you go to the synagogue and you meet with the people and you do that. And then as a spiritual practice, if you want to grow closer to God, if you want to grow closer to yourself, this is what I suggest that you do. Take time for yourself. Take time for yourself. In nature, or in your studio, or in your bedroom, or in taking a shower, or while you take a walk, or while you sit down, or like I do while I drink my coffee in the morning, which is my favorite thing to do. Like I drink my coffee, I prepare my coffee and I sit down, and I try not to take the first sip before I sit down. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, but I try not to. And then I begin, right? And I have to because I want to enjoy, and that's my time. My coffee is my time, right? So anything that we can do to kind of like encounter ourselves works. It's open. Any other comments before we go into the obstacles of speaking in the text? Okay. Wait, what happened to my text? Here it is. Okay. So even if occasionally the person's words are sealed and he cannot open his mouth to say anything at all, this is also very good because of his readiness and his presence before God. And his yearning and longing to speak despite his inability to do so. So now we kind of open the Pandora box here, which we will get to in further sessions, which is the topic of yearning. And the topic of yearning is huge in Rabbi Nachman. The sense of like, I'm embodying my present, I'm connecting to my heart, I'm in here, I'm accepting, like the tam, what a beautiful shoe have I made. How it's like sukal vedvash, like it's gorgeous, and I can accept and acknowledge the value of my day and look at for nekudot tovot in my day. And yet, and then there we go again, we don't stay there in the complacency of the acceptance, but we look for more. And Rabbi Nachman is constantly inviting us to look for more. So that concept of yearning, which we will get into, the value of yearning, the value of not enoughness, is something that we will talk at length, I hope, in future sessions, but it appears here also in Hitbodedut, right? You can't speak your words. You don't know what to say. You don't know how to say. It's okay. There's yearning there. Tap into the yearning. Verbalize the yearning. Talk about that. So he goes like this. That is his readiness and his presence before God and his yearning and longing to speak despite his inability to do so. This is in itself also, I'm sorry, I'm not reading correctly, very good. However, moreover, it is possible to make a conversation and prayer out of this itself, right? So now we go meta. Now we're going to talk about it. Now we're going to bring our own difficulties into the tefillah itself. Right? So I'm sitting down with my coffee and I'm spacing. And then suddenly I realize that I've spaced. Okay, so I bring myself into it. And then I realize that I don't know how to say what I want to say. So I talk about that. I bring that to God. The person should cry out and plead to God about this very thing that he has become so distant, he's unable to even speak. He should beg God for compassion and grace, that he take pity on him and open his mouth so that he will be able to express himself before him. And now, many renowned tzaddikim have related that they attain their high spiritual level only through this practice. The perceived individual will understand by himself, the perceptive individual will understand by himself the great benefit of this practice, which rises higher and higher. Furthermore, it is a practice that is accessible to all people, as we talked about, from the least to the greatest. For anyone can make use of this practice and thereby come to a very high level. Fortunate is the one who grabs, holds of it, and then opens up a whole other topic, which is something that we're going to talk about next. It is good to turn Torah into prayer, and we'll talk about that in a second. And from there, we'll go into, I hope, a little bit of a practice. So any like kind of brief thoughts, questions, something like what do you gather from this? Yes, Elaine.
I actually love this entire everything that he's saying. It all rings like correct, if I could say that, you know,
Yeah.
Truthful, authentic, whatever word one wishes to use. I'm somebody who gets like spilkes in Yiddish, you know, I get restless and my mind is very quick and it's jumping all over the place. And perhaps I have ADD. I'm just too old to have had that diagnosis. You know, we didn't have that disease when I was growing up. And fortunately, it didn't show itself in school, so whatever. But I practice a lot of yoga, and meditation obviously is very, one might say this is just, I don't want to say just meditation, because meditation is so powerful, but something that I've been trying to access for many years, maybe 15, like a lot of years. And making a daily practice has really been challenging, and I imagine I'm not alone. And it's a very big question to say, you know, what do you do? Perhaps to Rebbi Nachman, I don't know if it came easily or not. And it's
Right.
sort of an interesting question. I don't know if we know if it came easily. I'm guessing that it didn't.
About himself, that nothing came easy.
I'm guessing not, because he's putting so much thought into it. People to whom it comes easily don't need to really think about it and say you must have a daily practice for a length of time, not just, well, over time, not just for a minute. He's really very specific.
Yeah.
So any
You know,
contributions to the ability to sit still, keep the focus, are appreciated.
yeah. The contributions of the group, you mean, like to learn how to sink in? Yeah.
I've looked, you know, I've trained as a yoga teacher too. So, I mean, I've done the training of that, and a lot of which is physical, but a lot of which is meditative. So I've definitely spent time trying to learn, but I haven't learned from my own historical Jewish sources yet. One reason I'm interested in this. So yeah, anybody?
I would say the most important thing, go to a retreat.
Huh.
I don't think you can really learn by yourself. I mean, everybody's mind is that way. Go away for 10 days, 14 days to a place and do it. And by the end of the time, your ADD will be gone. And you'll either do it or not. But I think that that's really one of the main, in my mind, one of the best ways of learning.
Yeah.
And now there are Jewish retreats. Should you want to, although I have to be honest, all the Jewish ones I've been to were not as powerful as the Buddhist ones. But anyway, a retreat.
Yeah. Fully go in, right? The issue.
I think it's an interesting. I'm afraid of going to a retreat.
Right.
It's going to be very hard for me. Yeah. Thank you, though. I mean, that's right.
Yeah. There's definitely a scary thing, right? To go to these like silent retreats for an extended period of time. It's not Sometimes you have to jump. John, you wanted to say
Yeah,
something?
well, the word that's coming up for me, and I guess it's perhaps too modern for Rabbi Nachman to use, but for me, it's all about working with resistance. And, you know, the resistance to whether it's to practice yoga, to sit and meditate, to go out and do Hitbodedut, it's always that. It's always working with that part that doesn't want to do it. And sometimes I just have to let that part have the upper hand, often. And the phrase I remember reading of something about Rabbi Nachman, which I've always taken heart from, was a comment something like, he said that even his daily religious obligations or his daily religious prayer was a crushing obligation. I remember that phrase.
Yeah.
It was crushing to him, the fact that he really wanted to do it. And I mean, most of us are just not made of the same stuff. So I can't take on stuff that's crushing because I'm not strong enough. So I just have to take on a little bit. And I trust that the resistance will wear like the water wears the rock.
Beautiful. I mean, but I think that that's not very far off from what Rabbi Nachman is advising us to do. Like, for sure, he's setting up this kind of like this hour, right? And he does talk about like the effort that it takes. And in other sections where he talks about prayer, he talks about like, and you have to like put all your mind into following the words and being able to concentrate on every word. And from there, you create a beautiful bouquet, whatever, there's beautiful descriptions, but of the ongoing effort that it takes. That is true. I think it's just acknowledging the fact that this is hard. And as you talk about resistance, yes, we have to work with it. And sometimes how can we not be limited? You know, acknowledge it, but not be limited by our resistance, right? And I think what he offers, or at least for me, what I always hear and always feel like at the end of the day is the simplest thing is you just start small. Right? So you don't go for an hour and you don't go to the woods if you don't have woods nearby, or you go to the woods if you love to spend time in the woods. And I start in coffee because that's what I like to do. You try to find the least resistance. Right? It's too late for me for coffee. I'm having my water, but yeah, totally. Right? Like, yes. So you go with what you have. You work with yourself. You don't leave yourself behind, or you don't leave yourself aside. But on the other hand, you also don't want to be limited by your own limitation. And that's often, right, that kind of like tensions that we all live with if we engage in any kind of spiritual practice. Nothing that is of value comes without effort, right? It's kind of like, that's how it goes. Nothing of value is cheap. Because if it was cheap, it wouldn't have value, right? Like it demands presence, it demands effort, but it has to be according to my level, according to where I'm at. And I can't just pretend that I'm like this person, that I have the ability to sit down for a whole hour and sustain that. So that's why we don't talk about peak experiences. That's why we're not talking about the offerings at the temple where you go and you offer whatever that was about, which I have no idea, right? But we're talking about everyday life, showing up every day. And that's the teaching, that's the brilliance of Rabbi Nachman. He's guiding us into the small little micro steps that we can take to grow. Right? And for sure, as you know, you said, Linda, yes, going to a retreat and spending 10 days in silence, it works, it helps. But what happens when you come back? And what happens 10 days after you come back? And what happens 2 months after you come back? What happens when a year you come back? That is what Rabbi Nachman is saying here. Like, for sure, there are peak experiences and there are ways that we can totally, you know, I can speak about having gone to one of those retreats, and it really, 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 I still draw from it today, right? But if I didn't have the small everyday practices that I've learned through the teachings of Rabbi Nachman, I don't know how much I could still draw from that peak experience, right? At least in my own experience. I want to go to the next thing because like it's so important and it's so difficult, at least for me. So he's talked a little bit about the obstacles of not being able to speak or not being able to sit or not having the language that is accessible. We also can speak about the obstacles of not being able to connect with your heart. And now the next text that I'm not going to read, which I would like you to read on your own, is a text that describes from Rav Nachman the advice or the invitation to turn everything that we learn in Torah. And by that, I would also even extend it to everything that happens in our day. Torah is, how do we define Torah is a whole topic in and of itself, right? But Rav Nachman is saying, Rabbi Nachman taught us to always turn everything that we learned in our heads into tefillah, and turn it into a process of tefillah, of being able to speak about the concepts that we just learned. So that's something that I want us to do, on a weekly basis at the end of the session, to be able to take something that got our attention, whether it is in the learning today or any other day in the learning, and be able to turn that into the language of tefillah. How do I do that movement? And for that, I also want to read with you guys this last piece, which I find is very much with me lately. I'm going to do it fast. There's a pasuk, there's a verse. Actually, I think it's in last week's parsha, in Vayishlach. No, this parsha, where Yaakov is asking God to please save him from his brother Esau. Right? They meet after they haven't seen each other for 21 years. Yaakov stole the birthright from Esau. Esau wanted to kill him. He had to flee. He left. He went to his father-in-law, his uncle, for 21 years, and now he returns, and now he's petrified of the encounter with Esau, and he's asking God to help him. But the language of the Torah, of how Yaakov is choosing to request the help of God, goes like this. It says, and you have it there in the English, save me please from my brother's hand, from Esau's hand, right? So the commentators like Rashi say, wait, why do you need both? If you're already talking about the brother's hand, Yaakov only had one brother. What does he have to repeat Esau's hand? Yes, you get the question? Like, there's a redundancy. In Torah, we're very, very used to looking at the text very closely and assuming, with the assumption that nothing is said in vain, that every word contains a teaching. So we look for discrepancies, or we look for redundancies, or we look for funny ways to say things. We're very, very micro looking into the text to draw teachings from it. The Zohar, right, the main Kabbalistic teaching in our tradition, comments on this. And this is the Shla, the Shnei Luchot HaBrit, which was a commentator that I think lived in the, 1700s. I didn't do my homework and I didn't look him up, but everything that I've learned from the Shla is amazingly beautiful. He's not easy to learn, and I don't have by any means any kind of expertise in the Shla, but just to tell you that the Shnei Luchot HaBrit is such depth and such insight. And he goes like this. And so he brings a Zohar that comments on this verse and says that when someone prepares a prayer, it is important that he chooses his words carefully. At first glance, we would think that an appeal to God such as "save me" would be enough. Jacob added the words "from my brother" so that he could not be misunderstood as requesting to be saved from Lavan. Actually, he's talking about Lavan here, not Esau. That's interesting, but we're going to leave that aside. In the event that God could use the term brother, because if he said brother, he could think of Lavan, which was kind of his brother. In the event that God could use the term brother in a wider sense, he added the word from Esau, to make certain that God knew whom he had in mind exactly. He added what it was exactly that he needed to be saved from, i.e., an onslaught against his family. Right? So the Shla is saying, the Zohar is saying, the reason why he repeated from my brother's hand, from Esau, was because he wanted to be very, very specific about what he was asking for, about what he was afraid about what he was, who was he talking about? And then the Shla says, I believe that since the very letters used in prayer are holy, and we have this tradition, right, that the world, the mechanism and the vehicle for creating of the world was done through speech, right? God said, Vayehi, and let there be light, let there be firmament, let there be waters, let there be. It was all through speech. So in Jewish tradition, we think that the letters, which are the smallest unit of speech, contain in and of themselves a great amount of creative energy. So I believe that since the very letters used in prayer are holy, they are able to penetrate the outer shell of heaven and penetrate to God's throne. Okay. Atkan, right? So, right, it's not enough to just meditate. And like, of course, God knows what's in our heart, right? But for some reason, right? Or we can talk about what is that reason. It's so fundamentally important to be able to clarify in our prayer what is that we're praying for. To be specific, to be concrete, to be, as we say in Hebrew, meduyak. Meduyak is like exact, right? This is what I'm afraid of. This is exactly what I'm looking for. This is exactly what I'm going through. As much as I know, as much as I can articulate, right? But there's an invitation to be so precise, right? Not just vague. It's like, oh, no, be precise, be contain, like zooming, gathering, go down. So when we talk about turning our tefillah or our learning into prayer, that is also, right, another aspect of what we're trying to get to in these sessions, right? To be able to identify from today's learning or from today, what is that nugget that I asked you to kind of try to identify in the beginning of the session? Is there a nugget of today that you feel like, that I want to focus on? Or is there a nugget from today, from our learning that you have, that you can identify? A question. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that you agree. It could be something that you struggle with, something that you don't understand. You know, many years ago, I was talking to my husband, and I would go like, I just don't understand this. This makes no sense, and I don't buy it, or something like that. And like I was learning something in Torah, and he looked at me and said, Sabrina, when we have questions like that in Torah, those are invitations to go deeper. It's not like, I don't buy it. What do you mean you don't buy it? Learn more, inquire more, be more curious, go into it, right? So oftentimes the places that we have questions about are the places that, as you were saying, Elaine, alone, right? Like, oh my God, or like having the ability to settle in. I 100% struggle with that too, right? That's the place to go. That's the place to spend time with your heart, Hitbodedut, right? And yourself in that place, right? So let's, if you don't mind taking another 5 minutes with me, but if you need to leave, I totally understand. Can we speak about a nugget from today that we could see, at least vaguely, how we could translate that into a prayer? Into like a yearning, into like,
I think I don't mind saying something that feels quite difficult to say, but given that the mention, I think Linda's talked about Buddhism, and that's a tradition that I've spent many years in, and have sort of come back to Judaism with new eyes to look for, I think, some of the material that others are also searching for. The very existence of God is something quite difficult for me to firstly articulate and then accept and then relate to, let alone talk to and relate to. So I think the edge and the nugget for me has been I know from the moments that I've spent in Hitbodedut that, like you're saying, that's the place to go to, because if I'm also honest, I would say sometimes that the Buddhist practice I've done has left me actually a bit emotionally empty or alienated. I mean, that's a personal thing. I'm not commenting on the Buddhist tradition. I'm just saying it hasn't always given me the warmth of a relational aspect to what's bigger. And so for me, I think I can take from today the invitation to stay with this very difficult practice, especially for us moderns.
Yes.
And just, if I've got to pretend there's a God, I'll pretend there's a God. I mean, until it becomes real for me. Fake it until you make it, or the other way around.
Well, thank you for sharing that, John. Thank you for the honesty and the showing, of your questions. I really appreciate that. I think it's very beautiful.
I'm just sharing because I don't really think that it's exactly what you're asking, because you're saying of a difficult moment. And I'm thinking that one of the things that really makes me feel alive is swimming. And is we have a pool, and it's still warm in Florida. And so when I'm able, and I'm trying to do it every day, I try to swim, and today I lengthened it from 20 minutes to 25 minutes. I was very proud. And there's something about being in there. I look around and I just feel so, I don't understand, I just love it. And the feelings that come, whatever they are, I don't know. But anyway, I don't know if that's, I think you were talking about something difficult, and this isn't difficult, this is fulfilling.
Right, yeah. No, I think that what we're after is growth. It's like a growth, however you design that growth, right? Like what is the next move? What is the next place that I feel like I want to inhabit? Acceptance, but movement, right? That's the place of tefillah. That's the place. What is in your heart? Acknowledging that there are places of absolute joy in that physical activity of swimming, right? Like, yeah, right? And what else is happening in the heart? What is the heart saying? The ability to listen. We'll talk about lev nishbar, like a soft heart, softening the heart. The heart sometimes gets very hard or opaque or like dense or like, ugh. And we're in this business of like, especially Rebbi Nachman, of giving voice, giving stage to be in relationship with the heart. Yeah. Any other nuggets that we might want to kind of share in order to bring out,
I don't have this thought like, sharp at all, but listening to John and Linda and you, and thinking about what I've studied in Buddhism for so many years, which in what I've studied, the idea of exactly going where you're uncomfortable is very central. And I think this is more the Tibetan Buddhism, and that's exactly where you should be going. And we spend most of our time trying to distract ourselves with work, with sports, with family, with whatever, money, with whatever it is that we do. Excuse me. But here we're talking about just this huge extra layer, or this huge extra piece, which is that there's a connection happening with something else in whatever and with something which is God, and with something bigger than us.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, it doesn't matter to compare Buddhism in this, but I'm also a modern Jew, although I went to day school. So, you know, I have some textual studies, but never came across this approach. Like Judaism was, you know, be kosher, observe Shabbat, like, you know, those things.
Yeah.
Which definitely brings some people closer. They didn't bring me closer. That connection piece for me, I think, is really important. I'm not a loner person. I don't like being in the woods alone. It scares me.
Yeah.
And I like being in a city. I'm in New York and it's cold. No swimming here. So that's all. That's just something, like, I guess we're going to talk about a route to this connection to, I feel like that piece is very important. That's, I guess, what I don't know where else that goes. But.
Yeah. Yes, Linda.
One other thing is I was very touched by the issue of putting things into exact words, because if therapy works, and I'm not so sure it does, but anyway, if it does, one of the issues is, I think, being able to say it, and knowing, you know, spending time getting to the place of exact words and being able to have a relationship in which you can say the words. So anyway, it strikes me that it's very therapeutic.
It is. It is. Highly. Yeah.
I'm not so sure about the words part. I'm kind of feeling some people, I'm very good at words. Like, I have no problem with words. I think in some ways for me, it's a distraction.
Uh-huh.
I don't know, but that's not what Rebbi Nachman is saying, for sure.
Right.
But
yeah.
And I understand, like, the use of language, and for sure in Torah, you know more than me, but the use of language, if something is repeated, why is it repeated? You know, why is it repeated 4 times?
Right.
So I don't know. I'm not sure what to make of that part, but I hear what you're saying, Linda. You know, I think
it's a work in progress, right? Like, so yeah, so maybe for you right now, it's the words can be distracting. But that's okay. I think it's like, it's allowing ourselves to be explorers, you know, and to enter into the journey. What happens when I try to listen to the heart? What happens when I try to articulate clearly? What happens when I use words and they are empty, and that I'm not saying exactly what I mean, or right? Like what happens when and pay attention, and do that, you know, this week, you know, for like as little as you can or as much as you can, in a way that feels comfortable, right? That is like taking us along instead of creating more resistance that already is there. You know, that's the, you know, like at the end of the day, all the Rebbi Nachman teaches is put it into practice and see, you know, and see what happens, right? And then take yourself along, not forcing. Okay. I think we're going to be done for today. Yes. Well, John, thank you. Thanks for, you know, for coming. You know that I was telling John over email that I'm from Spain, and like, oh my God, you know, like it's so exciting.
Now, can I ask you where you live in Israel?
In Jerusalem.
And where in Jerusalem?
In Katamon.
Katamon, okay.
Yeah. It's a very beautiful part of Jerusalem. We're very much in love with this place. Okay, so have a wonderful week. Would love to hear. Again, I'm sorry, like this week I was also coming back from the States, and I've been like super busy and jet laggy and everything, but like finally arrived at my center.
It was lovely. Thank you.
Before we move again. Wonderful to see you all. Thank you for your words and your honesty and your participation. I really appreciate that. And I'll see you guys next week. And now have to think in my heart what's next. But I'll let you know. Take good care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Oh, bye-bye.